Welcome back to Side Quests VIII, episode 12, Return to Garden. Can you return to the same garden and step into the same garden twice? We'll have to wonder that with my perennial companion, if indeed he is, in fact, the same companion that I usually have, Wes Schantz. Wes, it's good to see you again.
Yeah. Yes. I think I'm the same, but I would say that. And garden drastically changes in the course of this hour, 2 hours or so, whatever it is that it takes to play this part. So no, garden is not the same garden. So
So when
uh,
you say it's not the same, do you mean that it's not the same in terms of the music that plays, the actions that take place there, the understanding you have of the nature of it as a character? What do you mean exactly? I mean, so just to jump in,
yeah.
Wes, just to get gardening, as we said in the pre-show, what do you mean when you say that it is not the same? That like Heraclitus, we are not returning to the same garden, or we can never go home again, or some sort of Odysseus idea that there are now suitors there and things.
Oh, there are some suitors, and there is what is the guy's name? Antinos, the chief suitor. There's one of those too, and he is a large blob type creature that lives in the basement of the garden, turns out. And so that's what I mean. Like, yeah, there's a new layers of the garden that we explore, and then the garden physically extracts itself from the ground, starts to magically fly, and heads out to sea. That's kind of where we left off, I think, right? Is Squall is getting his sea legs a little bit, and sparing the town of Balamb from this enormous flying school. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I do want to get into the details a little bit, but at least just talking 1,000-foot view, since we have now taken off, though apparently we have more of a ship than an airship, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We have witnessed in a game that is not averse to throwing tragedy into our face and to having us witness tragedy after tragedy, even if it does backtrack on occasion, like in the case of Cypher. And perhaps, but maybe not the case with Selfie, we'll see, is that we get to see both Balamb Garden spared and the city of Balamb spared. And who is at the center of making that happen? Well, certainly the people who did their part on Selfie's team at the
Mm-hmm.
missile base, but definitely use Squall. So as we talked about earlier, how does this student, now mercenary, who can't even fathom defeating this sorceress, ever become the hero of light? Well, he's racking up some victories, and
Mm-hmm.
not alone. I'll note, again, reiterating the party being the fundamental unit, and part of his Bildungsroman perhaps being that he needs to realize that. I think soon he will have actually even more authority thrust upon him, that he will have more responsibility for than just the hit to his party, but to the entire garden itself. And I think that will start to change his perspective as well. So I think we are seeing Squall thrust into life in the way that you would expect in a sort of Bildungsroman game, to produce maturity. So not only has he now seen battle, has he seen his friend turn, and interestingly enough, and I do want to get into this at some point, he wonders whether Cypher will ever come back, which is really interesting to me, given just how deep into things they are, that he thinks that's even an option at this point. It would strike me that he's a political criminal that would be subject to assassination on high treason charges, but I don't know, maybe not. Um, but yeah. So I just wanted to mention that at least with Squall, I think in this particular segment we see him making a turn towards hero of light as well as ideal leader.
Mm-hmm.
So he thinks about his team. Now I'm not saying he's anywhere close to ideal leader, but he wants to move in that direction, or rather
Yeah.
the game, the plot would like to take him and therefore us in that direction. And so in the same way that his team reflected on his motivations for choosing him and the way that subordinates who respect their leader might do, he reflects on them. He shows a thought for them, a care for them, for those who he is responsible to. These are thoughts outside of himself. And this is for someone like him, so closed off, so who Sid even mentions has difficulty expressing his emotions because he thinks there's no reason to do so because it won't affect anything, which of course I disagree with, believing to some extent in psychoanalytic methods and narrative methods and narratology, but that is his young, immature perspective. And so I think we see, in the same way that we see Balamb Garden finally get off the ground, and perhaps see the plot finally get off the ground, and finally realize, and finally get truly deracinated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In the truest sense of the word, the radix is gone. We are past the origin point. We are out of Eden. We were out of Eden when we first left Garden, but now even our Eden has become mobile and is moving. And so it is no longer truly we we as we are developing into a more mature, better leader and hero of light, we know even less what the nature of the world is, unless what we're starting to realize is that the world is unstable and its nature is constant change, and that everything is mutable, including the things that we thought were most racinated, were most rooted. Garden, our relationship with Cypher. Garden seems to be developing in an organic way, in the same way as Squall is, while also reconnecting with its ancient origins. The same way that Squall is now starting to embody these ancient archetypes, hero of light, so is Balamb Garden. So did we, and this is something I'm certainly going to write on in these two pieces I have coming up. We have to sort of go down to the infernal ancient depths of
Yes.
Garden and confront this immobile garden master force, which actually happens after we do the initial saving. So I should get to that first, but we have to go down and use this ancient machinery to occupy this ancient, like you said, semi-magical sort of capacity that we didn't know even existed in the garden, that Sid, the headmaster, did not even know existed in the garden. He knew there was some sort of anti-missile technology, but one would imagine a shield, series of sort of rockets that can intercept other missiles. But the fact that this garden would turn into an airship turned nautical ship was not what I initially would have expected.
Yeah. I remember this part really surprising me when I first played the game, and we haven't quite got control of this feature yet, but uh, it's like it's trying again to subvert your expectations. You think the vehicle you're going to get is going to be an airship, and FF7 does this a little bit too, right? Where the airship that you start out with gets shot down immediately and turns into like a boat that sort of limps around on the water, which is cool. Kind of,
Shallow water too.
yeah, only the shallow water. Yeah, yeah, and we do have like car type vehicles that we've been able to explore with a little bit, but yeah, this has got to be the one of the stranger vehicles in any video game, to have the initial hometown slash school setting become a mobile, yeah, missile shelter, I think is what Sid said it was originally. Like Garden was used as a shelter, and so that technology must be down there somewhere. It's really interesting how little Sid seems to know. And in a weird way, he's a lot like Squall in that regard, right? Like you could totally see Squall being the head of the school for years and years and never bothering to like check out what's downstairs. So, um, so because yeah, well, first of all, like I thought it was interesting that the way this portion of the game is structured is to have you re-explore the entire garden, right?
Yeah.
You cannot proceed until
Good.
you have cleared out all of the little spokes, which are reminding me a lot of Midgar, to be fair, right? And of course there's some kind of parallel there between the two initial settings of the two games. But here we are revisiting it. Each of the spokes has at least one, maybe exactly one, staff member who blows their whistle and tells you to die, and has an enemy that is most of them are very, very weak. But there is one enemy that is pretty strong that pops out here. The Grendel. Did you fight the Grendel?
Didn't I think I fought the Grendel, yeah, a lot, and the magic, and I like the literary reference, and I hope you explain it to us. I also got a couple T-Rexes with their 10 AP.
Yeah,
At,
that's right.
so those popped up. I like your connection to Midgar too, and also coming full circle, like an encyclopedia has it.
Uh,
We're walking back in a circle. And I also like that we're constantly asked which team we're on. De facto, you would think the headmasters, but eventually when Squall responds to Zoo, who I didn't remember, and maybe you can remind me, was our cohort at the graduation or something? She asked what side we're on, and Squall says neither,
yeah.
which I really enjoyed. And he says there are missiles coming this way. We gotta act. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, I wanted to point out, yeah, that the enemies that we fight are almost like rope-a-doping you up to a certain point, but then Grendel is a pretty powerful enemy with a high HP. Yeah, the T-Rex, you might not have faced either of these enemies before, although I think they were both possible to fight in the wild before this.
Yes.
And
Before
if
I
your
look.
level, I think if your level's high enough, they both have some really powerful spells. My levels are still quite low, so I'm not fighting enemies with anything too outlandish right now, which is a good thing and bad thing because if they have those spells, you can draw them, right? You can draw whatever they're using against you for the most part. And apparently, there's an enemy downstairs that uses the flare magic, which would be pretty rad. But I couldn't draw that from it. It had bio instead, which is, still cool and different. And so you can spend some time drawing magic. You can spend some time re-exploring this area. Uh, in the case of Grendel, yeah, it's that name is a reference to the Beowulf poem, a really interesting heroic story, right? And Grendel in that story is a descendant of Cain, so that's kind of the Christianizing of some Norse story of some kind, most likely. It involves a creature from kind of outside of civilized spaces that comes in and takes people who are sleeping in the hall after partying and having a great time and devouring them, right? So it's this kind of cannibal, murderous beast of nature that is somehow still pseudo-human. Um, and so what's going on here, yeah, is we're realizing that there's uh, beings that are not human that are nevertheless powerful and conscious and involved in our civilized world in some kind of way. Um, Chiefly Master Norg himself, right? And Sid was in partnership with him, uh, had the money to start Garden and has always, I guess, as a result, been sort of beholden to Norg. Um, so we're learning a little bit about the secrets that Idea was trying to find out from us. But part of what we learn is that she should already know them. So either something has happened to her where she no longer has all of those memories and experiences, um, or she's mostly interested in whether the seeds actually know what they're doing, right? So it's a little unclear whether she needed the information or she needed to know about our self-knowledge. But either way, some major revelations here, some really cool kind of payoff is finally coming as far as the story and just like as you're saying, like the where in the world are we and what's going on kind of questions. Um, but uh, but yeah, I definitely got killed by the Grendel the first time I fought it because I had my characters at low HP and I got careless in that fight and it attacked like a few times really quickly in a row and I was KO'd. I had to reset, but fortunately there's a save point right before that, so it
Welcome
wasn't
to
that big a deal. Yeah.
random KOs out of nowhere and game overs.
Yeah.
But okay, so I have a question for you, Wes. So you mentioned that we now have, this seemed like sort of a WB teen drama from the early 2000s
Yeah.
in terms of its cast, right? Not the most diverse cast we've seen. in a Final Fantasy, particularly species-wise, right? Like we don't have any even like androids, we don't have any vampires, you know, we don't later on there are people like Kamari that you see, you know, it's mostly these young, similarly aged kids. But now we've seen these Moombas. We've seen, you said Grendel, but then Master Norg Fururu, I believe he says over and over, is some sort of humanoid-esque, but clearly inhuman Jabba the Hutt, like solicit, you know, investor or you know, guy who works in capital and giving capital to individuals. And apparently, yeah, right. So you said major revelations. One is, and this is told by Master Norg, that Idea is married to Sid. What? Idea the sorceress? Oh my goodness. And then also that he wishes to give you the seeds up to Idea because he has his own plan. Apparently Sid and Headmaster Norg, or sorry, Garden Master Norg. So Headmaster Sid,
Yes.
head of pedagogy, Albus Dumbledore, and then Garden Master, more like the Board of Governors, like with Lucius Malfoy. And though perhaps a little bit different. This guy just raised the capital, so we know that he has a financial investment in Garden, but also an investment in working with potentially the winning party as well. And so he wants to give the seeds up to Idea because he knows and reveals to us that ultimately she wants to control all regardless. And I think there's some details that I missed there, so I hope that you bring them in. But my question, in the same way that we confronted the labyrinth and the minotaurs, the brothers, and the sword and the Excalibur motif, the King Arthur notions, and I suggested that that was like an archetypal remove or compensation for entering this hyper technological and realist dealing city. Here we go into the depths of home. It's like we're looking into the archetype of home and at our home, and we're finding what it really is, not at a physical level, but in terms of exploring the depths of what a home can really be, like what House of Leaves by Daniel Yuski does in a very unique way. He might not agree with that interpretation, but it's correct that the book is about exploring the unknown archetypal depths of something which is often seen as the best known thing. And as it turns out, that too is not very well known. There are all these depths and these parts of the basement that Squall did not know about. And apparently even this education, this makes me wonder whether this is in fact an allegory for education, will come with Squall. It can move, and it will move with him. In fact, he will have control of it in a moment. It will not stay stationary and in the past in one location, but uproots itself under his control and will move alongside with him. And so I'm just wondering whether Master Norg, therefore, is an archetype deeply lodged in the unconscious, within this notion of home, sort of a Luciferian one. He's deep below the earth. He's represented by three, right? He's a pod, but he's got these two hinge pods that work with him. So he's one and three. In the same way that Lucifer has three mouths in Dante's Inferno. And he seems to be in the bowels of Garden. Down at the very bottom of it. You need a special key card to get to him in the same way that you need special clearance to get down to where the release was, to make it so that Garden became mobile again. And so he, as well as where Squall has to access prior to fighting him, are in unknown territory that has always, at least so long as Squall has been there, been a part of Garden, but unbeknownst to Squall. And so my question is this a devolving into archetypal space, or is Master Norg actually a realist representation of yet a new race of individuals that we just don't know about? That well, it's hard to know whether we can generalize based on one representative, but it seems to have some qualities that we could probably decipher about him. The same way that Moomba seems sort of not to be very articulate. He
Yeah.
seems to be, well, heavily endowed with coin, somewhat immobile, and I don't know. He reminds me a lot of Jabba the Hutt, or like I said earlier.
Yeah. I I'm wondering about the inspiration for his character. Um, it does seem like there's a possible reference as well to well, I don't know, maybe they're both referencing something else, but this idea that a sort of huge dude is encased in a protective mech of some kind that's not very mobile, and that is mostly defensive. That's a thing that you see in other RPGs. Uh, in particular, I'm thinking of Earthbound, where your evil neighbor, Porky is his name in Japanese, but he's in, in English Pokey. Anyway, he does something similar in the second game, but also much more so in the third game, which I think comes out a good deal after this. So anyway, there's something like um, very unheroic about that, right? Like he doesn't uh, seem to go on any adventures. He doesn't seem to be you know, following any higher calling of any sort. Um, and as you said, you know, he's the money, he's the purse strings in this operation. Uh, so with that idea, I was starting to wonder if he might represent something not too different from an actual investor or investing, you know, company of some kind, with respect to the artistic personnel within the company, right? And I think we saw this a little bit too at Timber way back when we were talking to the journalists there in the publishing house, how they were sort of reminiscing and talking about how no one reads books anymore and stuff like that. Um, so I think there's possibly something like that going on if, you know, Sid and his marriage to Idea has some sort of, uh, you know, allegorical meaning. Um, it's something like the creator of these games is very attracted to and very involved with certain dangerous elements of maybe unconscious creativity, right? And then the two of them are able to do what they're doing only because they're getting money from someone much more practical, but who doesn't have a creative bone in their body. Uh, and that's a partnership, and that works up to a point. Um, but then when something breaks down in the creative side and there's a threat, then suddenly that link with the original you know, capitalist motivation and concern has to be at least intention and maybe ruptured here, where it's a little unclear what we've done to Master Norg. We don't have time to worry about it, right? We just forget about him. We got bigger fish to fry right now. So so I don't know if that, you know, sort of I you know, pecuniary reading of the thing is at all interesting to you. Maybe it's a little too literal, but that's what I was thinking about, like wondering, you know, what's going on within the development team that they're portraying in this fashion.
Well, I really like that, but I also like that within the Bildung's concept of Squall. He is realizing the depths of the political structure of his world, as well as now also the mortal nature of the world, but also the legal nature of the world with the things Cypher has done and what his team has been involved in, but also the economics now too. That there are real world decisions that need to be made and deals with the devil, as it were, Faustian bargains. Uh,
Totally.
and it's interesting to what extent, and this is very tangential. I think of Sephiroth's representation in the place that all the Shinra bigwigs think promised land, and he's encased in ice. And
Yeah.
below the waist, he seems to be sort of not human, very similar to the representation of Lucifer in Inferno, where he is encased in ice beneath his waist and is totally immobile. What's funny about that scene, besides the similar imagery, is that these business fat cats don't even know what the promised land is. They don't even know what to look for. They're like, is this the promised land? There's all this materia around here, and oh my god, there's Sephiroth encased in materia. That's amazing. Um uh and so Squall is now experiencing in a fantasy game that again we would think we would get away from some of these real world considerations, but Final Fantasy VIII does not eschew them. In fact, very annoyingly, perhaps most annoyingly, in a game that has many annoyances and is renowned for having many annoyances, you have to get gas for the car that you rent, and you can run out of gas if you explore around like you're normally rewarded for doing in a normal RPG. So this game is very, very pedagogic, and even if you go on forums and look at how people talk, the OGs, as it were, are always talking about how to play the game right. And so it and to some extent there is a right way to play it. And I did finally get Mini Mog and Biggs and Wedge, and I'm now playing cards a little bit better than I was, and beating people a little bit more regularly, even around the garden. But the club hasn't challenged me yet. I'm not quite there. But this game does not shy away from exposing you to economic realities, political realities, and even sort of psychological realities between people. And as Squall learns about the nature of his world, he is continually unlearning what he thinks he knows. And here, I agree with you that he does not understand the capitalist notion origins of his school, nor does he know that the headmaster of his school was married to this woman Idea, and his school can move, and was originally something else. He didn't know any of this. And so we continue to be disoriented as we learn. We know less than we did at the beginning of the game. But again, perhaps that's what it is to be mature, to be able to manage these uncertainties, and to now know that there are these categories of thing that exist, which we don't necessarily have a full grasp of, but do have some effect on, or some necessary effect on our life, and have been affecting our lives unbeknownst to us. The Garden Master is fundamental to the existence of Garden, and therefore to Squall's role there and everything that's happened to him. And he didn't know about his presence at all. And so part of what Squall is learning, and I suppose we should learn through him, is that learning doesn't just have a knowledge, like some Faustian knowledge acquiring, the devilish aspect, but in fact, learning is often learning the things that are already affecting your life and have been, and that might be of some value to you for understanding the world.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, the school itself, having these different kind of factions within it, becomes a kind of microcosm, I think, of a political situation, that's kind of built into basically every society. You have two chief factions, maybe there's a few others, whatever, right? And there's people like Squall who claim to be in neither faction, but I mean, when it gets down to it, there's going to be some sort of conflict, and one is going to come out on top, and then maybe there's a cycle of some kind, right? So I'm seeing that happening here too, where what was pedagogical in the strict sense of, like, learning to be a soldier for the purposes of gaining a job and status in this world, is now also starting to look like more of a complete picture of a mature reality. And this is also a point where, as you're going back around and talking to people, Squall is realizing that he doesn't know as much of this place as he probably should, right? There's a character who says that she graduated with you guys and that you've forgotten her, and she tells you her name again, and he's like, oh, sorry. I don't think he actually apologizes, but he is a little bit sort of taken aback. There's also Zoo, as you pointed out, like this other character who seems like a kind of counterpart to Quistis. I don't know if they were
He's the one who tells Cypher he'll never be a seed. Now I remember.
Yeah. She's involved in the mission. She's there for like backup in case things go sideways. And she apparently is still, an important staff member, very much in Sid's faction. So evidently knowing a lot more of what's going on, right? And and there's this thing about the layers underneath the garden too, where on the one hand you have all those different layers you have to traverse, um, just to kind of restart the technology and everything. And then it's a very different area of the basement where Master Norg hangs out. They there's a kind of weird stutter step the game's doing at this point where you do everything, you set up the garden as ship technology, and it goes, and then you wake up in your room and you have to go again, explore the garden, find where you need to go next, which turns out to be downstairs, right? So there's some kind of odd like recapitulation happening there. Um, it would be much more natural for those two things to sort of overlap more, right, and be the same mission downstairs, and yet they're not. And I was really curious about why that would be, other than just to have um, a little like break in the momentum of the missile section of the game, right? And then start this whole other apparently more freewheeling section of the game that that is initiated once you uh, are, I guess pretty soon we're gonna be able to like control where the garden goes. So um, yeah, that was a part of this that really kind of flummoxed me as I was thinking about, wait, what's going on here? And it should be mentioned also that we haven't heard anything from our other teammates, right? And maybe that's also starting to kind of wear on us at this point. But none of the characters seem to mention them um, out loud. That is, it's possible that Squall he does a lot of thinking during this part, so he might be thinking about that. I think as he wakes up, he's like, I wonder how the others are doing. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Trying to find that.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. Thinking about Squall's thoughts about others, and so I was just I'm I'm sorry I paused for a moment because I was thinking about so just and I know we can check these schematics because this is a wonderful thing about Final Fantasy VIII and having been made over 20 years ago. This or no, sorry, almost 20 years ago at this point is I think originally, so when we were going down into the deep bowels of the garden in order to mobilize it, that is deeper
Yeah,
than the garden master, right? So we initially go deeper, and then we have this extremely anticlimactic battle. There are these what two oilers or something they're
the
called.
oil boils. Yeah,
They're just these creatures that I guess we can use some fire on, and they were pretty tough, but I got through them the first time. Didn't need a ton of strategy with them, and then right we see the scene full of cinematics, so we keep seeing and these clips of the missiles coming, and the missiles
that's
are
right.
fine. They're sort of Eye of Sauron. They seem to have an AI, a proto AI. They have these like avian reptilian slit red eyes. Each of them that like moves, and it is accompanied by their they come this grand attempt to hit us, and we fly away, and then we have to get by Balamb Garden, and there's a extremely climactic after a very anticlimactic battle, but after a huge climax is promised by these constant starts and stops, or these sort of Homeric intermezzos where Homer has somebody's jaw get hit by a rock, and then talks about a lamb and some grass for 7 lines, and then mentions the fact that the jaw is now like rolling down the hill, and for creating expectation and desire to know what comes next. And here we have that. And then again, we wake up. Over and over again, we wake up in this game, whether we're in prison or on a hospital bed or on a train. or even in the middle of a forest, I guess in the beginning of a forest. Now we wake up in our bed. This is like a new beginning. In fact, could be a new beginning, and perhaps is some sort of new beginning. Um, and the first thing, if so, we see this as a new beginning. The first thing that Squall has to do is get to the bottom of things, and so he does. He goes down to see the garden master, and it's sort of a question of whether he's even going to do that, right? Isn't he told to go see Sid as well? And doesn't he go to see Sid and give his report after seeing the garden master? And why does he give the garden master his report? is my other question. He does seem to be showing his neither side, and not because that would seem to be what he would give to Sid. He does obviously face and fight the garden master, but that's because the garden master wishes to take him into custody, as well. But so Squall wakes up again anew in this place that is renewed or renovated, as it were, and has to take control in some way, get to the bottom of things, and for some reason, well, I don't know. I don't recall how far in the future his elevation is, but it's almost like if he is going to take the top spot in Garden, he needs to, in some way, supervene the top figures. It would seem that Sid can perhaps give him a greater rank than he can. He can be like, "You're the new headmaster" or whatever, if he wanted to do that. But there's got to be a power struggle with the garden master. And so I wonder if this, in sort of a realist political way, shows a continuation of a reorientation of what Garden is by showing a reorientation of Squall's new elevated role within it. He's no longer a student or a deponent. He's coming back as the alpha, as the chieftain, actually. And in fact, he's taking control. And so he defeats one of the controlling parts of Garden, and is physically piloting the Garden too. It would seem that his role is now developing into that of the chief, the leader of this space. And that might be what this new bit, as similar as it is to the former bit, is continuing to emphasize.
Yeah, this bit with the conversation with Norg is very, I mean, surprising. Even Squall has to admit that it's a shock, right? And he gives the report, or he tries to give it to Sid and says it's just come back later, right? Whereas Norg demands it right there. And Norg is doing like full supervillain mode where he's like explaining his plan to you, right? And so there's been some subterfuge, right, on the part of Martine of Galbadia Garden, trying to get the blame placed on Norg, right? And now Norg is trying to take you into custody in order to sort of level that with Idea, right? He is worried about Idea thinking that he was behind the assassination attempt, right? So that's all kind of cleared up here, sort of. There's also a John the Baptist reference dropped there, right? The head on the platter, which is pretty interesting, because we saw Squall being on the cross already, and now we're seeing him in John the Baptist's place.
Son of Cain, Grendel, son of Cain.
Sorry.
Sorts of biblical references making their way in.
Yes. So again, the point of the seeds is also being kind of elaborated here, where after we take down Norg with his weird pod thing, it's kind of a gimmicky battle, right? As long as you attack the two pods, you can keep him from casting any powerful spells. It's just kind of a waiting game. You got to make sure to draw a Leviathan, right? So another creature from the deep, um,
Yes, and there you go.
next
There you
guardian
go.
force.
Biblical reference there.
And then he sort of turns into this like orb thing, so it doesn't seem like he's totally defeated. It's unclear. Anyway, we go up to see Sid, and he is in the infirmary at this point, uh, recovering from being pushed around downstairs, and he will let you sort of ask a bunch of questions. Um, he lets you make your report. Turns out he already understood what was going on. He'll tell you the real meaning of seed, right? It turns out he answers with a tautology at first, but then it's clear that the real purpose of seeds is not to do all these missions around, but specifically to take down the sorceress. And this makes it extra confusing that he and Adea were working together on this originally, right? Knowing that she might be the sorceress. Um, and she apparently didn't take that possibility seriously, whereas he always sort of knew that was, um, that was possible or even likely. So Sid becomes a really interesting character here, in that he is willing to do so much, um, you know, laying so much groundwork, right, for such a long time, um, and is, you know, in some sort of relationship with the person who that work is set up um, to counteract. Um, and then again, this bit about the sort of the funding of Garden is the other thing that he'll explain there. So there's, in a way, a lot of revelations happening here. Um, but in another way, it sort of just shifts the ground of what's mysterious about Garden, right? Because we still don't fully understand what is up with Idea now, what it means for her to have changed from the person who Sid married and worked with to her now being this, you know, this person who kills the president and takes over the garden and is willing to destroy the other garden, right? Um, all of that is pretty indicative that something major is changed with her, and again, Sid doesn't fully explain in that regard what's going on here.
You,
Yeah.
that's interesting because that strikes me that there is a really ominous tone that's now been touched on or toned or pressed twice now, because when we were in the flashback to Laguna in the very cathedral-like city that in fact Rain's home even has stained glass windows in it.
Right.
One thing we were concerned with Young alone was her being chosen as the next sorceress. And this was a concern. There's like a notion of like the rape of Ganymede or even of the rape of Lucretia, like the notion of grasping or being taken against one's will in some sort of hunger game, Theseus into the labyrinth sort of way. That there's some violence potentially involved and lack of choice, lack of agency when it comes to becoming sorceress. In fact, we will find that it is very much similar to a violent, to rape in that it does not involve necessarily or we'll have to talk about that, how willing the recipient of the sorceress's curse or gift has to be. At the very least, it seems to be a very ambiguous gift to receive, even though a very powerful one, and not one that one would necessarily want, and would certainly have lots of consequences. So when we hear about Idea having sort of a bifurcated or a consciousness or having been one way and now another, we really start to wonder what the nature of this selection process is, right? Like, is there some sort of metempsychosis or transmigration? Is this like a singular entity or consciousness that houses multiple bodies and like takes the place of their soul? And so it's like really scary because they lose themselves, the most important aspect of them, their individuality and the capacity to individuate, um, and their potential immortal part, depending on the theology underlying this world or the cosmology. And so I think a host of ominous questions arise, seeing the not positive response we were getting in the past, and then also a major, not only a major change between Idea then and Idea now, according to her roles, but even a preparation to fight with ostensibly the greatest tool in existence against this threat, which is again the greatest threat in existence.
Yeah.
Because the gardens will help with any sort of normal wars, in some ways similar to Final Fantasy IX, with Kuja selling, weapons between one place and another, because the whole idea is just chaos between them. It doesn't really matter. But Sid's idea seems to be, well, as long as the wars in some Orwellian sense are always just going on, actually everybody's kind of safe. It's when the sorceress takes control that we need to worry about true cataclysm. And so we need to prepare for that. And in fact, all the other wars, we don't really mind. Even the Galbadian sort of attempts to become tyrants, we didn't see Garden doing a whole lot. We did happen to be involved in a lot of what has transpired with various assassinations and regime changes, but that originally we were just trying to take money from a faction within them, but possibly with an eye to the future, because I guess Sid chose to do this for perhaps personal reasons, or at least he had a personal connection to Renault. And so that's what I'm wondering now, Wes. Now that we see a sorceress in the world, we hear that Garden is used as some sort of tool to fight the sorceress, and we saw a past representation of there being a possible selection process, which doesn't seem there doesn't seem to be a mythology underlying it that makes people really want to participate in it. It doesn't seem to be such a great honor.
Yeah.
Right?
It seems like particularly in this part of the game, there is some emphasis on Renoa personally also. So we didn't have her in our party, but apparently if she is in your party, you see some unusual or some special scenes where when there's that sort of thing that you step out on the balcony and it pans around Garden as it's flying. If she's in your party, she'll be in that cutscene. And it sort of zooms in on her, and you see again the wings on her back and her hair sort of blowing in the wind, all that, as the birds fly overhead. So it's kind of like a reprise of the opening FMV sequence. And then she also will show up in Squall's room to demand that he give her a tour of Garden. So when you wake up and Squall's having all those thoughts, she appears and says, "Show me around," basically. And so there's a lot of dialogue between the two of them as you go around, including you explain hot dogs to her, of course, like how wonderful they are, and she like bursts out laughing. And then if you go to the infirmary, there's an exchange where Dr. Kadawaki asks if she's your girlfriend, and so it's a very Final Fantasy VII moment of like, what is the relationship? What do I think it is? And uh, and there's it's sort of laughed off whichever way Squall answers. She sort of like gives him a hard time about it. But this is clearly some kind of development of their relationship with one another. And when you go to the library, if you explore that much, even before going downstairs to see Norg, you can find Elone sitting in there, but she won't tell you who she is. And she says, "It's heartbreaking that you don't remember me." And so it's just like, huh, that's weird. And then so, I mean, in this next part of the game that we play, that will be sort of revealed. We're going to go and find her and move the plot forward a little bit. But she's already there. She's already in the garden. And we knew that she was there too, right? Because we saved her that other time without knowing who she was, from some monsters in the training center, back when we first encountered Renoa. So there is some kind of weird thing going on about who Renoa is, who Elone is, what's up with becoming a sorceress, right? That's very much kind of coming to consciousness for Squall at this point. But no one is explaining anything still, of course.
That's really interesting because I was going to make a joke earlier that we actually only exist on YouTube, and that when these videos end, we just this. So when you said that we are always the same and would say we're always the same and are not perennially different versions of ourselves, that is because we don't actually have existences outside of this digital realm. But to that point, talking about the difference between the hero being active in the world and the sort of villain being shut up in his own narcissistic or solipsistic invention, like a Porky or like a Master Norg, because he has this capitalized name and has, I suppose, he shares these inarticulate rage yells, so there may be something there too. But one wonders, what is Cypher spending his time doing? The last time we saw him, separated from the team, separated from Garden, he had been very much vitiated, weakened. Then the what is the word for? Oh, yes, innervated. There's a good medical term for it. He was pathetic. If your Squall is strong at all, I think one of my times through the game, I had strength plus 40 or 80% by this point, and one trigger slash from Squall defeated him. And I remember wanting to do that because I thought it was a very Sephiroth thing to do, to defeat your enemy in one sword slash. And I did it. But one wonders, while we have been active, and many antagonists in good literature, good film, like good Bond films, Final Fantasy IX does this very well, 7 too. Good antagonists are moving. They're acting behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. What does Cypher do? What is he training? Is he developing a relationship with Idea? What is he doing to move his story forward? Is he moving in a sort of anti-hero parallel way to us, or is he stationary now, stopped? Materia is mastered, no growth on the sword anymore. Is he more like Norg, who has become this, right, and becoming corpulent, he has become more of a creature of the earth, more of a creature that is stationary, that does its work from where it sits, more vegetable, even in some ways, Aristotle would say, in emphasizing the nutritive faculty more, and not the motive animal faculty, as it were. But so Cypher, has he retreated into the unconscious? Has he retreated into passivity? What is he doing? Do we have any indication of what he's doing as our relationships continue to blossom with not only Garden, but our team, Renoa, even though she wasn't on my team, but that's still part of the story, regardless of my personal experience of the game, which is an interesting question, to what extent additional content is part of the story if you don't experience it. But what do you think is up with Cypher? And I guess I asked this with the smallest wisp of a hint of him from Squall's question, will he ever come back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would have expected him to show up in some form in the attack on the Garden, right? He's the one who orders the missile strike, I think, although I guess acting on Idea's orders. So once they realized that the missiles did not destroy the Garden, I would assume that he would be deputized, to come and either, take out Squall / Sid, or at any rate, like assert control of the Garden on Idea's behalf. So I'm expecting that we'll see him soon, and that he is, having to make his report to Idea, about the true meaning of seed, as far as Squall knew it. And also, they're both going to have to pivot now that the missiles didn't find their target. Now, it's also possible, because there is that third Garden, right, Trabia, that he's involved in whatever mopping up operation might be happening over there, because it's clear that Idea wants to unify control of all of the garden operations. And yeah, so either way, that's what I take Seifer to be up to. Just continuing down that path. And it's interesting, right, that he is present in card form if you play Sid at cards and you win the Seifer card. So for whatever reason, Sid has got Seifer's card. Just a little detail.
And I hate when people over literalize or over literarize plot points as if a plot point naturally happens and isn't placed by an author. But one notices a strong parallelism and juxtaposition again between Cypher and Squall. And I use that pronunciation because Zyger Gaming uses it, and that's how I heard it in my head growing up. So I stick with that. That's just why I say it. I'm not trying to stand on ceremony or anything like that. But Cypher is going to take control of his own garden. And so he too will be upranked, elevated, in the same way that Squall is now controlling a garden and will soon receive the rank necessary to, in fact, give various orders and commands. Cypher is going to be doing that too for a bigger and more powerful garden. So having taken a different path, there may be a moment coming up where Cypher seems to be like maybe behind the scenes, he did do the right thing. And he will show evidence of profound growth when he manages, and we really need to talk about the psycho sort of physical or metaphysical notion here. This strikes me as very similar to like a creature turning into a card. He will manage to mess up one of our, and in fact, split in half one of our GFs. There will be, this is not something that we have seen and will have seen before. But I do have a question. For all of that elevation is the subordinate to the sorceress. We know this. Who is it that Squall is the subordinate to? I think the obvious answer is Sid, but that's not going to be true soon. And so is Sid the sort of Dumbledore to this sort of Bellatrix Lestrange, Voldemort sorceress? Or who is pulling our strings is my question, because we know Cypher has his strings being pulled. And if we're truly parallel to him, ours are being pulled too. If we're not, and we're not like Cloud at the end of his own disc one with Sephiroth, then that would be an important difference. Perhaps we have an agency that he doesn't. But perhaps we do not have that agency. Again, that's yet another layer that we have not uncovered. A mask that we have not had revealed at the end of Scooby-Doo, as it were.
So we're about to find out more about who's doing the Laguna stuff, right? I don't remember much about this game, but I do remember that Fisherman's Horizon is really delightful, and I think that's where we're headed after this, right? So there's some really good portions of gameplay and just for talking about coming up here. It's exciting.
Roy Mandries, a fisher of man, as Carl Jung always like to talk about. But,
yes.
Peter and his brother, as it were, and Andrew, I can't remember. But yes, Fisherman's Horizon, so more of the biblical sort of references.
Oh yeah.
And this game that mixes and mashes so many mythologies together. Well, Wes, another fantastic conversation getting into the profound depths, the profundus, as the Romans would say, or I guess the profundi, the profound things. Profundi rays. Well, I'm very much looking to getting to pleasant things after all the excitement with you, and perhaps finding a new place to plant our garden.
Yes. All right. Sounds good.
Till then, my friend.
Thanks again.